Hey, good evening, everyone. Today we're going to be going over understanding financial documents. I'm Linda Taylor. I'm a certified public accountant. I've been doing accounting for 35 years, maybe more. My associate is Earl, and he's worked in public municipalities. I basically have done a lot with CPA firms. I've done audits, and I did a lot of volunteer work. I'm kind of like involved in the community. So one of some of the community organizations, I'll either volunteer my time, and one of the ones that I did volunteer 3 years with, and that was Detroit Public Schools. And that was a volunteer, not a paid position. So basically I would go to the meetings and look at some of the things. One of the things that we discovered as CPAs is that when we would go to local meetings, and I even go to small nonprofit to large one, the need for more involvement of kind of showing the board and the audience how to read financial documents. And that's one of the things that we're going to talk about today, because what happens is once there's a deficit, then everybody, well, how did we get to the deficit? So basically getting involved in the beginning of knowing what the budget is can kind of help you to gear towards the end result. So I'm going to be talking about that today. How many people and I thank everybody for coming this evening. I know this is the last of your series. How many people in the audience are know how to read financial statements or understand? You do? Okay. You're majoring in accounting? Okay. And you read financial? There's another person. Okay, you do? Good. Okay. Anyone else? Reading financial statements can get really, really detailed. So we're going to do as much as we can, but the financial statements is the end result, and it's very detailed. I have over 30 years of working with nonprofits. I had my master's. I'm a Hoosier, but I've lived in Michigan for 20-some years. So I went to Indiana University, got my bachelor's and MBA, and worked with different companies and so forth. So, and I started when I was like 14, because that was my love of accounting, and I did certain things. So one of the passions I had was to involve myself in the community with my career. Okay, so what we're going to be talking about today is public documents. And public documents are available because they're public. You have the right to request them, and a lot of public documents are on the website for local, state, different things. But the problem is people have to learn how to navigate through the website. Unfortunately, with computers and so forth, we can go in if the news is saying there's a budget deficit with the city of Detroit. You can actually should be able to go to the website and look at that budget and see what they're talking about. A lot of times they have meetings so that they will know they can go through the budget. So a lot of the budgets and public documents are accessible now on the website, but of course there's a lot of detail to it. So we're going to talk first about the budgeting system. Before you get to the financial statements, which are the balance sheets, the annual audit, there has to be a budget set up. So basically, once you set up the budgets, start looking at budget costs and analyzing public budget. So what we're going to do, we're going to go into a budget, and I'm going to have my associate go into looking at what our budget's all about. Can somebody tell me what a budget? Okay, budgets generally, and he's going to go a budget, just like you do a budget in your household. How much money comes in, how much money goes out. So if somebody is in control, and it's all about control. Whoever is in control of the money, the budget, that's gonna make a difference as to, is there gonna be enough money left at the end of the day? Are there gonna be overrides, deficits? Did someone do something they shouldn't not have done? And that's where at the end of the picture, the auditor comes in and they attest to this money was not used properly according to the budget, and an audit can be done. Basically, if the records are bad, we still do an audit, but we do an adverse opinion in which we tell what findings, and that has to be done by an independent person. So basically, your budgets are set up by your legislature. Then you have people controlling them, but at the end of the day, an independent auditor has to come in, somebody that's not related or that's involved in the day-to-day, and they have to tell the truth about what happened to the deficit. So I'm going to have Earl come up, and he's going to talk about the budget process. What do you want to do?
The budget process.
This one first?
No,
Maybe.
the next one. Yeah.
Okay, hold on. Okay.
Good evening. My name is Earl Hollandquist. I've been an accountant and auditor for about 30 years. I'm currently a financial consultant, but my background is I was manager of audits at Blue Cross. I was the finance director at Highland Park, and I was a controller of the E-Course. Linda just mentioned overall about the financial statements that all come as a result of the budget. The budget in municipal government, schools, cities, and whatever, the budget is the most important item going. That's your guide. That becomes the law. As a controller of finance director, I was always the bad guy because in order to do a budget, you sit down with various department heads who come to you and tell you, hey, Earl, I need $1 million this year to run my department. And I said, well, no, I'm going to let you have $900,000 and so forth. And that's part of the process of budgeting for municipal. And of course, in the city's case, it would all ultimately be approved by the city council after my department had created the budgets and so forth. One of the keys, though, to the budget is in municipal, there are various funds like general fund, revenue fund, water fund, and what that is almost each one of them is like a separate entity. Each one has its own balance sheet and own income statement. Now we got samples in our package, and we'll be going over income statement, balance sheet, and we have a budget in here that we'll also be going through too and tell you. This here shows you some of the governmental funds. The general fund, which is the main fund for cities and state and educational institutions. This is the main one that everyone look at. Then you have special revenue funds. Do you have debt service fund, capital, permanent fund, and like the city of Detroit, you have a water fund. Now, currently it's a separate entity, but previously it was part of the city of Detroit's financial statements and so forth. Then you have the proprietary funds, which has sub accounts like enterprise fund, internal service, fiduciary funds, pension plans, investment, agency funds. Yeah, I'm going through. Good. I know
Can someone tell me what a capital fund is? What you think that might be? Okay, capital fund would be your structure. If they're going to, like if the Detroit Public Schools wanted to buy certain buildings, then a lot of these funds are restricted. A general fund is your regular operating, and that means that for salaries, utilities. The other funds are what we call restricted funds, the pension fund, and those are funds that should be approved and should stick with the budget. and normally there shouldn't be a deficit. Most budgets are supposed to be balanced. And if something, if as they follow the budget from month to month, if there is a deficit, then that means something went wrong or somebody is not following the rules of what the budget should be. So basically, in fund accounting, they separate the funds with the city and the state and whoever to make sure these are the funds we need for certain activities. Unlike regular operating funds where you just put money in there and, well, if I've got extra money, like if you're doing your budget at home, you might, you've got to pay your light, gas, and mortgage and so forth, but you might put some money aside for home improvements. Then you might have to borrow from the home improvements because of emergencies, but if you borrow, you may want to put it back. And that's what has happened to a lot of the local, state, they've had to borrow from pension funds and other funds because the general operating funds, there was too many expenses, so they started dibble-dabbling in these restricted funds. And we're going to show samples, Earl's going to go over different things like that. And he's going to talk about the debt service for the bonds they had.
Right, yeah.
Okay.
For the city.
And then what the city did, they borrowed a lot of bonds and couldn't pay some of those back. That was the school system. So you have your different types of serial bonds. Does anyone know what a municipal bond? You want to tell them that? Oh, she does. Okay. Yes.
So, a municipal bond. I was thinking, the bond is the debt that's owed to the banks based on, I'm thinking like utilities? Is that right?
Right. But yeah, a lot of
municipal bonds are when the person who buys it buys into that particular bank, into that particular entity's fund, like, they sell shares, like something for the, for you to be able to receive money at the end of the period. The bond is for a certain time limit.
And that's so sometimes a city or a local, they have to borrow, just like sometimes we may have to buy a house. Well, we don't have the cash, so we're going to borrow on a mortgage. But then we're going to put that in our budget to pay it back. So that's what the cities and some of with these funds, they may get into something bigger than what they thought. Just like if you buy $1 million home and you lose your job, or either you really didn't have that money, then you're either going to have to borrow or you're going to lose it. So that's what happens. Most nonprofit and municipalities, so forth, they have to borrow, and they do, and they have a rating on Wall Street. So basically, that rating determines how much money they can borrow, and without borrowing, they're not going to make it on the regular income that comes in. Did you want to say?
For city government, county, educational institution in the state of Michigan, they don't directly borrow. The state of Michigan does the borrowing, so that they might send out debt bonds and they might borrow $10 billion, and then they loan the city of Detroit $1 billion. They loan to certain schools, and they get a lower rate because they have a better rating than local governments and educational institutions.
Mm-hmm. And we're going to get in later about how the Detroit Public Schools, what effect that had when the state borrowed bonds, and then they'll redo the bonds in terms of saying, well, this bond we'll do a new one, and it just gets bigger and bigger. So, and then they get to if there's not enough student enrollment, which is where your revenue and your property taxes, then they can't pay the bonds back. Okay.
What specifically that's what they call an anticipation bond. School educations will borrow because they don't get paid to October. They need to start their money immediately, come July 1st and so forth. So they'll go and borrow money, but they must pay it back within the year before the year is up, called a tax anticipation note. So, the Detroit Public School District got in a problem when the money under the emergency manager was not paid back immediately, so that money kept accumulating that bond, and it grew, and the interest grew on it to the point to where you might have borrowed 50 million, and it turns out that when it ended, it was 200 million. But we got some samples of that
Yeah.
we'll get into later.
So basically, there's in terms of budgeting, you have to have the right people in charge of the budgeting, and the public should get involved, because sometimes if you have someone over budgeting and they're not really for the best interest of the community, then they may make a decision that's going to eventually cause a deficit. With public funds, there's basically the public controls the public funds. Now you got corporations, you got stockholders, and they come to the stockholder meetings, and it's dependent. And then if you're nonprofits that you're in, your board is supposed to look at those funds and track them to make sure that the day-to-day people are operating and spending it according to the approved budget. So basically, every year you would have an approved budget that would need to be tracked. Sometimes this is never looked at. Some of the audits that we have went out and done when we got ready to do the financials, the audit, we couldn't actually do an audit because the records were not there. There was a conflict of interest. If there's a conflict where we see the board is making decisions between each other, or either the budget, we look at a budget to do the financials, there was no budget. Then we look at, there's no budget, but you have a board. So then we're looking at qualifying that opinion, because we're seeing that, and we're required to make a notice of that we're seeing that if there was no budget, how did you determine? And then we find out one person is to determine it, but you have a board. The board could eventually be liable if these are federal funds. And that's another thing. A lot of these funds are flow through from the Department of Labor. They're flowing money down to the state that flows it into each of your entities. Department of Education, that's coming from the state flowing on down to the city. You got your Department of Health, Education, and Welfare. So those are federal funds. If there is misuse of those funds, we go in and we see that the health, education, and welfare, you didn't do daycare, what happened, then we can disallow that money, and the federal government has to find out why that money was not used for its purpose. And then there could be lawsuits, or the money has to be returned. So a lot of these local and state funds are coming from your budget, your state budget, and your federal budget. So they have to be looked at and tracked, just like a nonprofit. Now, nonprofit, if you get money from just public funds, then that's looked at. But say you're getting money from a grant that the city awarded you, then you have to abide by the rules of that grant. And that grant the money may be coming from the Department of Labor for training, and if there was no training, then that would be a disallowed cost, which would affect the budget and the financials, which would cause the agency to either return the money, and if there's other things going on, they could almost close them down, or somebody would be liable. So these funds, again, with local, state, city, they're coming from public money, tax money, property taxes on up from local, state to federal, and it's very critical that they are tracked and used for the purposes, and that's why they are restricted. Yes.
With regard to a nonprofit,
Uh,
with regard to a nonprofit, if all the revenue is coming from public funds, who holds them accountable if the money isn't being spent properly or if it's not being spent at all.
So you said if all the money comes from federal funds
From
and,
public funds,
uh-huh.
and the money isn't being spent, or it's not being spent properly, who holds them accountable?
Oh, the funder, okay. If you're a nonprofit and you receive money from, say, the block grant funds or CDBG, they are supposed to go out there and review those funds and see that when they write the RFP, you may get it through an RFP or it could be a discretionary funds because your organization needs money. They are to go out and review the funds to see if you use those properly. Now, if, say, the city and the CDB, they do not do an audit on that, those funds, again, are coming from the state and the federal. So then the state will audit them and say, well, so the report has to go on up the ladder. So they're supposed to go out, and if the funds haven't been used properly, they are to give you a report. And they can disallow those costs and have you pay those back. But is there an incident that you're thinking
How
of?
long does that generally take? Like that whole process, like how long does that take?
How long does it
It's
take?
a lengthy process.
Okay, generally, if you are awarded funds from, say, CDBG for fiscal year could be July 1st through June 30th or calendar. At the end of that fiscal year, there should be you should get you're required to have an audit, or the city has to send an auditor out there. They have internal auditors that would go out there and review, and most of the time the funds are drawn down on performance base. In other words, say you were awarded $200,000, they may not give you all the 200 at one time. You have to request that on a monthly basis. So when you request it, they're supposed to look at the financial, your monthly reports and see if they're okay. Now at the end, if they discover that the money was not used properly, then they would have to write you up and they would probably put you on sanction you for not getting funds the following year.
We're speaking in terms of desktop auditing, right? But is there somebody who actually goes to, for example, homeless shelters? I can speak from experience that in some of these places the money isn't spent properly. So is there anyone actually going to these facilities to ensure that people are getting what they need, or that the money is being spent properly?
Okay, well now when you deal with homeless shelters and stuff, depending where it's coming from, you would have two types of audits. A compliance officer is supposed to go out and see, is everything the way it's supposed to? Are the people getting food, shelter? If that's not the case, then that's a violation right then and there. So they know if the people are not getting the proper food and shelter, then what's the money being used for? Then you got your financial. So you're going to have they generally have two people, of compliance person and a financial. Now, depending on where if the money was donated from corporate America or somewhere, they may not go out there and look at it. Because this is a donation that they want to write off, or they're part of something that helps. But if it's federal money, it could get very detailed. Now, we call whistleblower. If someone thinks that something is not right, and they call down to the city for CDB funds, and there's a hotline you can go on, and you can say, I think XYZ is not spending the money right. Then the internal audit staff, or the auditor, or their fraud, they have to send someone out. If they don't, they can be reported to the next level up, which is the state or the federal government. So where
can I find out more, just in detail, like how that process works?
Okay, I'm gonna give you a slide on it because that's a real detail. Another thing, and sometimes people show up at the board meeting. I've seen all kinds of cases where you have a board meeting and here comes people from the community, and they're saying, we know that this is not right, and then of course the chairman and the board, they're going to look into it. They don't want the community. When I was with the Department of Labor, which was it was in Nevada, Las Vegas. We had lobbyists and advocates. We knew when they showed up, it was all over. So basically, and we reported to the state, to San Francisco Regional 4. So basically, you can show up at a board meeting, you can write a letter. When that's done, there's going to have to be an investigation. And the thing is, if people see things going on, they need to investigate ASAP, and that's what happens. The budget, it goes out, people see things, and no one goes to the local community meetings or say anything, so it just gets out of hand. Was there anyone else that have given us? Those are good questions that you have. Are you measuring in auditing or?
No, I'm a humanitarian.
Okay, but that's good. That's good that you are wanting to get involved in the process of how, if I see something going on, I'm not happy about it. This because it's your community, and it's your children, your people. If you see a bunch of homeless guys I work with the veterans. I'm very involved in community work outside being a CPA. I probably should have been a social worker, but now I'm called by the school board a revolutionary CPA, whatever that. I thought that was pretty nice. But anyways, if you see a ton of vets sitting on the street and then they're building a new veteran foundation, then, this veteran foundation over there, admission is pretty good because I've taken tours and stuff like that. Then you're wondering, well, there's money, then why are these guys sitting out here? Just like with the school board, if there's kids that aren't getting their education, and you know that the budget is saying so many millions, why aren't they, there's a problem here. So again, just foresight and looking at, if we have funds for daycare and after school programs, why aren't the kids? Then it's time to get together and find out and control these funds before they get out of hand. Because again, the budget is the first step towards taking charge of the funds. Any questions? Okay, I guess I took over. But that's a good question. So again, there's all types of funds that we were going through, enterprise and different funds. So now we're going to, Earl is going to go through the how do you analyze your budget process. So we're going to look at the stages that are involved in government budgeting. Again, the budgets. Without a budget, you don't know what's going on. You're just like in your household. If you bring in $2,000 and you give it to the husband, and he doesn't know what he's supposed to do with it, then he'll go out and do whatever. If you say this is what you need to pay the mortgage, well, we can say it to the wife too. I'm not going to blame it on the husband. If you're bringing $2,000 in, we need to pay this mortgage, utilities. Now at the end, we may only have $30 to go out and have do discretionary funds, what we call, not non-restricted, but these funds are restricted. You pay your mortgage, you got to have food for the kids and toilet paper and things, the basic needs. Now, if there's more money needed, then you need to look at, well, how can we get more money? Do we need to cut some of our spending, or are we buying more food? And that's the same way with a local budget. If it's going overhand, somebody is playing around with the budget. So Earl's going to go through what's involved in governmental budgeting.
The numbers are just bigger, but the process is still the same for budgets. Governmental, in preparing a budget, if you have an existing business already, you've got prior years actual. So you use that to project on what's going to happen into the future. If you're going to do an expansion, if you have to do some cuts, you can take the actual you had last time, but, well, I'm only going to have, instead of 50,000 students, I'm only going to have 45 students. So that should mean a reduction in some of the teachers, some of the supplies and everything else just going forward.
Some expenses, like for instance, they might be hard to project. Not all of them are equally as easy to project as others. For instance, like when I bought a house many years ago, they told me that the previous tenants, I called them, the gas company, DTE, and they said, well, the previous owners of that property, their gas bill ran like, what, $300 a month or something. I mean, this was when things were a little cheaper, not
Right.
cheap. But what I'm saying is that, if suppose you're building a new property, you don't really, and according to what the square footage is gonna be, and if you haven't ever had utility service for it, you don't know how much it's gonna cost to put heating and air conditioning into that amount of square footage.
Right.
So you can't really project what your all of your expenses.
A thing like a house, if you had a previous one or somebody in the neighborhood has an existing one, you can get some ideas from there.
Oh.
The key from running a business is that if you've had it for more than 1 year, generally if it's the first year running a business, you won't know until that year is completed.
Mm-hmm.
And that'll be your basis for budgeting next year. Your first year you might take a hit, like say your utilities might be more than you actually thought that year, but you'll know next year, and you'll know the cycle because you have a whole year and so forth. And that's pretty much how you prepare a budget. It's from experience and being exposed to things if you've never done it before.
Now, a lot of times when you get to utilities, you can call DTE, they'll have an average. Now, say you moved into a house, if that average house, they'll tell you, well, an average house, and your architects and engineers can tell you that, this house should only be paying $150 a month. Now, the people before that may have just didn't have proper insulation, or they did not, they let the windows open or so forth. So when a building is being built, they are estimating the costs, and they're also finding out, well, a building this size with certain electrical gadgets, your solar, whatever, should only be this. So most of the time, when a building is built, they generally do what we call a developmental cost
Assessment.
Right, and they will get that from experts. So basically, if you're buying a house and it's energy effective, and DT, you can tell if the appliances, then your bill should only be a certain amount, even though the people before may have. So you use estimates and different things that you can find on the website or whatever. You're not gonna get a big house on the Boston Edison where the furnace is driven by a I can't think of those big old furnaces and
Probably a boiler.
boiler. And people I got myself in a situation like that. And I was paying more for the boiler than the cost of the monthly note. So basically, those houses, when they're redone, they have to do and I've known people who bought big houses like that, and they were basically in one room just.
I've not heard of that.
And then you can't run heaters. So it's all about knowledge and understanding, energy effective ways, even with water. And that's what you would put in your budget in terms of even with just like the buildings and when the schools were built and all that stuff. This was all budgeted by so-called consultants that were paid a lot of money. A lot of times when the city and the state, or when they get ready to do buildings, they'll have people on a committee that will do procurement. And they'll say, well, let's get ABC company and let them estimate. And they may charge $1 million for the consulting. Then and that's a problem when you're getting ready to have a capital fund or a building fund, because you're getting these consultants. Sometimes you're consulting, you look at the consulting fee compared to what the development fee, and you wonder, well, what happened here? And then your results are not obtainable. And so that's another thing in looking at budgets. If you see big procurement, consulting fees, then you need to get into more detail and who's in charge of these. Okay, so does anyone else have any questions about the budgeting?
I want to finish on, continuing on with the 3 types of budgets. Like the actual year that we were just speaking of, but you know exactly how much you spend in those areas because the CPA is giving you a report. A sample would be if we were doing a budget for the fiscal year June 2018, if we did, then we would also have listed out, spread it out, the end of June 2017, which just ended. But we would have the actual numbers unaudited, spread out. We would also have the actual from the previous years, the CPA report, spread out and listed. So you got 3 different types of numbers all going across that will show you what's taking place. And this is to help you project going into the future, because you got an actual that's certified. You also got one that just ended uncertified, but it's close to it. And so now you can project on what's going to happen in the year, because you've been spending supplies for 2 years. If it's been staying the same, it's probably going to be the same next year, unless you're expecting an increase in students or a decrease and so forth.
And what we're going to do, we're using the Detroit Public Schools as an example. I mean, this is all public record, so one of my friends said, you better close your blinds, and because when and so we're going to show, he's going to show where the actual and the current and things, so we're going to bring that up because again, we're going to look at the capital budgets, the process budgets are estimated, they're prepared, and then you got people meeting. Sometimes they listen to the people, most times they don't. It just depends. So you want me to bring up the Detroit?
Yeah, while you're doing it, I'll go back.
Okay,
The budgeting process for cities and education is that all the departments do their input. It gets approved by council and so forth. And for municipal government, it is mandated. You don't have a choice. You must submit a budget to the state. That is required by law and so forth. And it must be balanced. That's where the trick comes in. Some people, in effect, lie about what the numbers are in order to balance that budget and send it up there. And in actuality, throughout the year, you're supposed to amend that budget. If you say you're going to spend $1 million on school supplies, it turns out after 3 months you done spend $1.5 million, you got to go back and amend that budget. Somehow you got to find a place for that $1.5 million, that $500,000 to go taken out of somewhere else. And if you're still going to be buying supplies throughout the year, you got to correct it. And that's mandated by the state, because it'll be reflected in the final financial statements. After the CPA comes in, he does a comparison of your budget to actual, and he comments on that. All right, you went over budget over here by $2 million. You've got to do a report explaining to the state why you went over that. And that's all. That's every city, every county, every educational institution in the state of Michigan. It's required by law. And we're going to get into why the city of Detroit got in trouble, because they constantly went over their deficits and they had to bring in a bankruptcy. The Detroit School Board had a bankruptcy without going through court, if I can.
Yeah. Another thing I was going to say, if you have a budget and it's constantly going over, that means somebody's not watching it. Well, we look at, you have no controls. In other words, that's why you have an internal auditing department or someone, the board, looking at, well, why is this so? You can't let it keep going over and over. So if we go in and see that no one's looking at the budget, that shows that your controls are weak, and we will be very hesitant to do an audit. We're doing an audit because we'll probably qualify your opinion because you have weak controls, which means there's overthrowing of the policies and procedures. You have to have firm policies and procedures in place to mandate the budget process. If no one's looking at it and Susie gets to buy what she wants every month, then somebody's going to be held accountable, and generally it's going to be whoever is, usually the board or the state. And they're going to be the ones, it used to be where they'd say, well, we didn't know little Johnny was doing that. Well, under Sarbanes-Oxley, which was, they're no longer going to blame the staff person. They're going to take the top person on to jail because they knew this. So that means you have no controls, that you don't really care as long as you're paying the bills and putting money in your pocket. Okay, so we're going to go into a financial statement here, and not this one. Let me see, this is which one we got here. Not that one. It'd be the Excel, here it is right here. Gotta find that one, that was it. Okay,
That's it.
what this is, Earl's gonna go over, this is from the Detroit Public School, and again, this is, any public documents are, you have the right to look at, so don't feel, if I go tell somebody on the street I'm gonna go to jail, let me close my blinds and all that kind of stuff. This is your money. So you have the right to know why things are not happening, and don't listen to someone saying, just listen to what I say, and that's it. Just like if your wife comes in and says, I said I paid the mortgage, and you know she didn't, and then you're scared to challenge her because she may fire you or throw you out the door. And we look at that too when we're doing an audit. A lot of chief financial officers, they're doing what's told so they can keep getting paid, and they're afraid, well, if I say anything, I'm going to get fired. Well, you're going to get fired anyways, because when the feds report you and you are holding this office, you will be in trouble with someone much higher. So Earl's going to go over this, and this is a budget, which he was talking about the 2015 actual to 16 and the proposed.
Yeah, this is the proposed budget for 2017. It's also in your package if you got anything. The importance of this is the first budget year that the new people came in. This is after the state, quote unquote, supposedly bailed the city, school district out. We got to understand that they were under emergency manager here. The emergency manager was hired by the state, the same guy early from Flint. He made decisions. He borrowed money the board and the public had no input into. So that when it came time, they created another entity within the school district. It went from City Detroit Public Schools to Detroit Public Schools Community District. And what that did, if you look at the top line up here, the property tax, the actual for 2015 is there. The final for 2016, which is the second amendment, it hadn't been certified yet. That's what I was talking about. And the proposed for 2017, that's blank. This is the property tax that goes to that you pay that goes to the school district. The state is saying, that property tax is going to go to the old school district, which is down at the bottom. You go down to debt service here. That's the money that the school district owed. You see it's in the first column, the second column, but it's not in the third column. That's the proposed district. So they're saying, all right, this new school, you ain't got no debt. The debt is going to stay with the old school, which is Detroit. That's for the sake of expediency, I'm just going to call it old school versus new school. And they're taking the tax dollars out that the city employees, that people pay, and they're using that to pay the debt that's still there that's being paid off and so forth. So that you heard rumors that they bailed out the school district. No, they just switched it over. Now, had they went through an actual bankruptcy, there would be no debt at all. This would be wiped out. We'd still be in a new place going forward, but in wiping out that debt, the state would be on the hook, and then nobody want to do that. So this is why we're trying to tell you how reading financials give you more than just numbers. It gives you background and information and so forth.
So it looked like the governor was saying that they were going to pay the debt, but you're paying the debt. The city is still, because they're putting it in the back end. Then they're saying they have a balanced budget. Well, we're going to see at the end of the year. And so they're saying, well, we will put all this in the back end, and we're still going to be able to operate. So, okay.
If you'll notice at the bottom there, where it says ending funding balance, prior to the new school coming in, you had, you go up all the way, you had $214 million that was actual, that was a deficit, and it increased to 236 million deficit. And suddenly in the new year projected, you're gonna have a $17 million surplus because it's not carrying that debt. So,
when this, the state says, like how much money is going to schools by, like, per pupil, when our property taxes are no longer part of the revenues, does that mean that there is less money going to schools per pupil, or is this?
It will be. What they did, they increased, the state also gives the cities and the school supplemental money. You'll notice that there's an increase. If you go to line, I think it's down there where it says state source, it was 300 million, 429, then it went to 445. They call themselves offsetting that the money, but it really didn't, but because it was only an increase of, what was that, 16 million, but they took away 68 million and so forth, you know. So that's what they call themselves doing and saying that, well, you don't need that. And of course the state, this is a proposed budget, they was anticipating a decrease in students. Because ultimately they figure that people are gonna go to charter schools or whatever and so forth. So they don't need as much money coming in.
And what about the debt service down here?
Okay.
And this is actually about state sources as well. Does that include constitutional sources of revenue and legislative sources of revenue? How could I break down state sources?
Actually, you can go on the website. The state revenues and so forth are public information. You go up and you look up Detroit School District, it'll give you a list of each time they're making payment how much. They give you the state and the constitutional amounts that's going to be given
For
out.
municipalities as
Right.
well?
Go
Okay.
in the state of Michigan to the treasurer and then into the district.
Thank you.
And that's for every school in the state of Michigan, every city, every county also.
And so the debt service went down. But see, but this debt service going down because of the fact that they're putting it on the back end, obviously you're going, if your debt service is 63 million, then you're going to have an excess of, they're showing an excess of 17 million. Because they're not picking up the 63 in the debt service, whereas, and that's part of the property, so basically, that's why they're looking positive down here at the 17, because the debt service is gone, where the prior year school board had to cover that. And then, what do you want to look at something else?
I want to make sure they can see this here.
Yeah, so they're saying, well, we have extra money now, but I guess so. You got the property taxes, and you're going back up here, so they're using. It looks like they were getting close to 70,000 every year for property taxes, and they're going to use that to pay the old debt back. So people's property taxes are going up, and they're losing their homes. So anyway, so basically, the new school board does not have to worry about the debt service. But they do have debt when they do their notes. So, yeah.
Okay, yeah. One time at the bottom, one of the things, and this applies to every place. The bottom line here is fund balance. At the end of 15, there was $215 million deficit. That carries over to the next year, so that the following year, don't care how much you cut and save, you ain't gonna cut $200 and some million out of your debt. So you starting with a deficit already. That's why it said beginning balance. So whatever you do that year, like this year in 2016, they end up having a deficit, and it increased to $238 million. And that was the same with Detroit, only bigger numbers and so forth. So once you start having a deficit, it just continues on to the point that you can't cut anymore You know, you really can't. I mean, you have to fire every teacher there was and so forth. You cannot do that. And they knew that, and this did not happen when the school board was elected and was in charge. This happened under emergency managers. It was all about the money. If you get nothing else out of here, always follow the money. There's a reason for that. You know, just always follow. And try to analyze. When any financial information, try to get comparative years. That's how an auditor works. That's how we look at it. You look at what happened. If cash went up this particular year over that year, what happened? Did you sell something? Did you do something? There's an explanation why there's large variances between items only. And that's how you should be looking at when you look at any financial documents. Do comparison. And that'll lead you at least to ask the right question. You know, hey, my utilities was 20,000 and went up to 50,000. There's a reason for that. Tell me what's going on. At least you can answer the question.
I'm sorry, I don't understand. I do see that the property taxes is now zero, and that the debt services are now zero, and that the transfer from the district is raised by 25,000. Million. I don't understand. Like, where did the money really go? Why are these two figures in the financial year 2017 proposed? Why is it zero? I know you explained it once, but I didn't understand.
You're talking about the property taxes?
Tax is zero. I don't understand why.
That's because the property taxes, they're taking your property taxes and paying the old debt. So they've got their budget looking, you know, so they took out that saying, we're gonna take property taxes and pay the old debt. Then you were down here at, so then the debt's.
Old debt not reflected on here?
Huh?
Old debt, is that not reflected on here?
It's under your debt service. So you'll see nothing under debt service so they're making, in other words, you can, and I hate to say fudge a budget. I have been, sitting down I come in do an audit and the person tells me, but we did, and I'm like, you know, and I'm like, I want to tell them, you fudged this, but you know, you have to be professional. But you can play around with these numbers. You know, it's a numbers game. Unless you really know why, you know, and like that's a good question. You're asking, well, they're moving this here, they look good.
And why did $25 million transfer from other school districts go up?
Okay, she said that 25 from other school districts. You want you to explain
Other
it right
financial
here.
sources, the very first line item?
Is that the source?
Right here, sources transferred from other school
Why did that
districts.
go up?
That's one you're talking about?
Yeah.
She wants to know where the 25 million, why do they?
Oh, they're projecting this. Now, what they're saying is that they're going to be bringing in those other schools, EAA, back into the Detroit public school community. One of the things that they're saying that they're going to pay us, I'm sorry, not us, they're going to pay the school district money, because what happened is like the EEA got Mumford, which was a $60 million joint that was just built. They got that for $1, but part of it they were supposed to pay the city $12 million a year and so forth, which they didn't. So if they didn't pay, and I got it in my budget, I'm gonna get $12 million, and you only give me $2 million. That's automatically a $10 million deficit I got just in that one item in there. So here they're projecting, oh, Mumford's gonna pay me this time. The EEA is leaving and so forth.
Yeah, see the.
So after the financial manager is gone, who holds the EAA schools accountable for their money that they're supposed to give the city?
Yeah. Well, they're bringing it back into the school district. And by the way, the emergency manager's gone. We got a new school board, but we still got a review board that really makes all your decisions and so forth,
So the
your
review board
financial
holds them
system.
accountable? So the review board holds the EAA accountable for not.
Well, now I think effective today, July 1st, the EEA is now back into the DPS now. So everything is back in there. That's my understanding. It was supposed to be. I think it was supposed to be. Yeah.
So this 25 million is off. His projections off average daily attendance from EAA?
No, it was supposed to actually be paid because they're supposed to have money set up. What's going to happen, I guarantee you, by the December, they will have nowhere near that $25 source in it. But if you'll notice, if you take that $25 million source, then they got a deficit here. You cannot, by state law, you cannot submit a budget with a deficit. You must show a positive, even if you have to hope for $25 million from other sources.
And again, a budget is a projection, and we're going to show you. We have a little test for you for you inquisitive, to show you where a budget was submitted by the emergency manager to the Detroit School Board, and I'm gonna maybe, I don't know when we will flip to that, and they did some funny little things there to make sure it was
Balance.
And the school board noticed that, told the emergency manager and the governor, and this is in your package, and I don't know if you want to have them. I want to see who can notice and somebody who would notice what happened to this. But before we get to that, we're going to show you, tell you how the budget. Yes.
I'm sorry.
No, go on.
So like the $68 million in tax revenue that's going to pay for the new school district, how long is that going to take off to pay the old debt at that rate?
What did they say?
68 million.
To 20 years, I think. Is it? Herman Davis here is our former school board president. He was there.
He probably knows more.
I think it is. Because there was a lot of maneuvering. You know, one of the things about finance, education, and politics, finance is going to win out automatically, which is the state did not want to take over the debt of the school district. So they came up with a way of getting around it. And that's where they came up with this, in effect, a shell, the old school. Ain't nothing there, there's nobody in charge of it, just all you're doing is receiving taxes and paying the debt, the loans and so forth.
And most of the homeowners don't understand that money that they're taking from you now, they call the old code and new code.
Right.
The old code is the old board. They're using that to pay off the debt, the bonds of the misspent money. They misspent $2.1 million of our property taxes.
Yes.
And we need to have a forensic audit to send some folks to jail. And that's what we're still working on.
And we're going to, again, and what Mr. Davis said, I'm going to show you some letters that were sent. Looking at this budget again, another thing you want to look at, support services. That's where they can, public services. Okay, what's the instruction? You see where it went down from 62 to 55. That could be where they had all kinds of things going on. Then you got school administration, the $79,000 on operation and maintenance. They bought software. Then some of your contracts, it's all hidden. So when you look at this, you're like, okay, general administration. When we dug into this a little more thorough, we found contracts at $1 million plus $5 given to people without a approval by the top. And we looked at the procurement policy, and it says anything over $50,000 should be approved by the chief financial officer. They weren't. So, and that's why you see the federal government coming in and taking people on the jail, because you're messing with contracts. You have played, you're giving them to your buddy. You're inflating. Then you probably saw where the school teachers, and I don't know, those contracts, they weren't even looked at. So basically, and I'm not sure, but those were contracts that somebody gave the school teacher, the principals or whatever. So the controls, Detroit Public Schools had very weak internal controls over the emergency manager and the governor. The governor, it was a conflict because the governor emergency manager controlled the money. You have to have an oversight. There was no oversight. So if the governor and emergency manager says, emergency manager told his staff, do this, then, and if they had to do it, and then he was approval and he report to the government. Normally, your school board is the oversight that says, wait, this looks bad, we're not. And ironically, and we're gonna show you a letter, every year when the budget is ready to be sent to the state, is sent to the school board, because under a public act, and Mr. Davis knows about that, the school board has to approve all budgets. So the budget comes, and I'm gonna show you a letter. Are you ready to?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna show you the package that the governor sent to the school board for approval, and we pulled it apart, and we couldn't believe the fudging, and that's where the tests that you guys are gonna have. So let me find this package for you.
What she's talking about is that, like, the school district and it needs an anticipation note. So
Here it is, yeah.
even if you borrow $10 million from the state, you have to show when you're gonna pay it back, and you have to show your cash flow that's gonna be coming in. You know, you're gonna be spending out $1 million a month, or we're bringing in. That's why I need this $10 million to cover me until I can to spend that $1 million a month and so forth.
Right, and here, this is, so they are now in the process every July, because their fiscal year is from July 1st through June 30th, so now they're into the 2017-18, but this was done where the emergency manager sends a letter to the
If you look up at the title, you'll know that name, Darnell Early. I don't know if you're not familiar with him, but he was the Flint emergency manager.
Okay, so this is sent to, and what Earl was saying, they have to ask for at least 125 million or more, because to get the school year started, you won't get, the school year doesn't get any money until they get the head count. So once the kids are enrolled, then at the end of September, based on number of children, students, then they start getting their drawdowns. We call them drawdowns. But prior to that, they have to borrow from state money. And this is a letter that's sent simultaneously. It was, I don't know if it's going to them now, talking about borrowing 125. So they're asking Mr. Davis, who was the board, and his board, to say, we have to borrow this. And pursuant to Public Act 436, the board has to approve it, so they can't really, in their bylaws, they have to get approval to get the 125 million. So in the package, the emergency manager says, we have done a cash flow budget, and we're going to show you that in a minute. And he says, these are the things we did. We did a cash flow budget to show you this is going to balance. If we take the 125 million, we have approval from the state. So they put this package together. They selected a team from a law firm, Miller, Canton, and J.P. Morgan. They paid them close to $1 million to look at that. Now the school board, it was ironic, they had these consulting firms meet with them, but the school board never got the privilege to meet with the consulting firm to understand the process. So they just kind of left them like stepchildren or whatever. You know, you're out here, but you. And then they bring this to them. They have 5 days to look at it and approve it, send it to the state. But prior to that, they have taken 2 to 3 months, maybe 6 months, looking at it and paying high-end consultants to tell them how to turn the bonds over and so forth. So this, and it says that they have the exhibits and they need the approval. It's an additional, they want, so this is Darnell Early, who was the emergency manager, and he goes through and he looks at what their short-term municipal bonds are. He signs that, and what the amount they want to borrow and how much is going to pay back, and some of the other millage. But this is what I want you to, and then they show the line of credit, how they're going to pay this money back that they owe. But when we got to this, and this is in your package, we looked at that, and I want to see, let's see if I can turn this thing around. I want to see if you can see what is funny. I could not believe this. Now, let me see if I can turn this page around. I don't know how to turn this page. It's upside down.
While she's
You
doing
know,
that,
you know how to turn this page?
oh, that lady.
Yeah, normally on here, I should be able to click this thing at the bottom. Because I want you to, this is your test. And say you're at a meeting and you're assisting the board to understand this. I wonder how we can turn that page.
This is the cash flow statement. This is our monthly
Budget.
revenue and expenses going forward to the year till they have paid it off in effect. They said, all right, I'm borrowing this 125. This is how I'm gonna pay it back and so forth for my revenue.
Yes,
I'm gonna pay it back even though I'm steady paying out money. I'm also pay this debt back.
This is a projected monthly cash flow.
Right, yes.
Right,
Exactly.
right.
Yes, yes.
And again, they did, the emergency manager staff did this on an Excel spreadsheet. They finalized it, submitted it to their boss, who is the emergency manager. He packaged it up so he could get the Detroit Public, the president and the school board to sign it. And once they signed it, it would go to Lansing for final approval. But there's some mysterious things on there when we looked at, and I'm not a specialist in Excel, but I looked at certain things on here, and I want to see if anybody can. I showed this to a couple MBAs and PhDs, and they didn't find this. I want you to look at the top part with, as you know, when you do an Excel spreadsheet, the budget at the top, your revenue is always, at the top, and the bottom would be your expenses. I don't know, okay, oh, I see what you're trying to do.
And you see by the last column down there, August is a positive thing.
Hold on, what, he did what? Rotate. Oh, see, yeah, see,
Oh, right here.
okay, then we have to,
It's a little, is it visible though? Can you see that?
okay, that might be good enough.
Do you need the whole thing or just a part?
I could scroll down, because you got the whole thing on there.
Yeah, but it's getting cut off, so I can.
Oh, yeah, I need March down there, but that's fine.
That's fine.
Okay. So when this was submitted, given to the Detroit Public School Board, and I was there and Earl, and we were just there, like I said, volunteers, and so the emergency manager said, you've got to look at this. They had a meeting on Tuesday, and he wanted it back by Thursday. So at the beginning, it shows your beginning balances, and this is cash flow, so what they're trying to show that here's how much cash we have coming in from last year, which 32,000. So we're going to collect 6,300. I'm going through from 6.3 million from taxes, state. So they're projecting what they're going to get in for available funds to carry the school system. So that's 81 million. Underneath would be your expenses. So you would subtract the 81 million from whatever your total expenses are, and that would be the difference. So I guess they got the 81 million minus the 70 million, which is 11 million, okay? So you keep going across and looking at this. Now I want you to go across, and then I want you to go down to the bottom, and then they have to project everything up to the next year before they get any money. So just look at, and then go to February and tell me if you see something in this Excel spreadsheet that doesn't add up.
And through August, you cannot have a deficit. You must have a positive, which they're showing here. Come August, I think it's like $8 million surplus. That's what they're saying.
See, what he's saying is the ending balances are zero. So the emergency manager could not show an ending balance as a deficit. So everywhere where you see ending balances, there's pluses Okay, when you look at June, okay, if you do July, it's got ending balance 11,106,000,000 on up. Then you get to January and there's only $268, and that means that's how much cash they would have. Okay, we're getting down here to February, and they're budgeting. They're bringing over they're saying the 268. We're going to bring that over as cash. Here's what we speculate we will get, 73 million, and then here our expenditures would be 73 million. So we're ending up with zero. Then you go to March. They're saying we're going to get 58. We're bringing in nothing from before, and that means like at the end of this month you paid all your bills and you got $200 that you can take to next month and add that to. Okay, so you got your receipts, 56 million. Then they have their expenses. The expenses are coming up to 56 million. Does anybody see anything?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Why in other expenditures is it a negative number?
Thank you.
That's what I'm talking about. That's it.
Now, if you go, that is what I looked and looked.
You
Now, I mean,
cannot
I'm not
have
a,
negative expense.
I'm not a.
That would be income, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So what he did, now this was signed by the emergency manager and his staff. I looked at this and I said to Mr. Davis and the board, I said, this is not an Excel spreadsheet. You cannot have a minus in, so everybody said, well, they're going to halt you, better close your blinds and leave the state. So I redid it, yes.
I'm
Right.
listening to what you were
There
saying.
is no way. So when we brought it to the attention of the board and Mr. Davis and staff, we were like, you're fudging, again, they fudged this. I went back through and redid an Excel spreadsheet to show, I said, Mr. Davis, the school board will be out of money by December, January. And Helen Moore, who was a very advocate, we knew it. The public didn't. They couldn't put this on the news. They knew they were going to be out of money. So he had his staff, and then these are people with CPAs and chief financials. Was they're not going to say nothing because I'm going to lose my job or whatever. The board was courteous enough to contact the emergency manager and say, your figures don't add down. Can we talk with your chief financial officer? You need to redo this. Totally ignored.
Wouldn't they be? Is it possible that they could say projected surplus?
This is not a surplus.
But I mean, in order to change the connotation, as far
No,
as
they knew they had no money.
They-
You know why they didn't have any money? Because they did not pay a state aid bond. They were carrying in 2 bonds that one should have been paid the year before, and they didn't tell the truth about that. So again, and only because we looked at this stuff. So basically, the money they asked for at the beginning of the prior year that was supposed to be paid off before the income, they didn't pay it off. So then they had that money on the back end and the new money. So they're like, oh my God, we can't show this. And how they thought. So we redid I redid it, and I put these are the assumptions. And so we sent it, and and I went through and put down the positive, like negative. We're not gonna. You don't put an X. I learned that, and I think, and I wanted to get some high school kids from Cass Tech. So this is showing in March they would have had a 52 million. That is what by December they had to tell. These are the figures, and I did assumption 1 of the 90 million. Then we did assumption 2. Did a lot of work, and the board, Mr. Davis, submitted it. Nothing. He heard nothing. I even sent a letter, jeopardizing myself, because again I wasn't on their board, and I had to be careful with what I say. And I said, it was a special meeting, these are the action items and whatever. This budget actually went in, the general public never when the school board's okay, then 5 months later, you're out of money. They were already out of money, so he lied. Then not only did that happen, in November, so they went on and submitted, they didn't care what the board rejected it. They didn't care because the EM and governor can override you. Their thing is we just have to show it to you. And you can say yay, nay, we don't care, but at least we showed it to you. So then what happened later on that year,
The
2 months,
emergency manager got the $125 million, even though by that projection, you went from an $8 million surplus to $144 million deficit.
and that
But it went through.
financial that you're looking at is on record.
Mhm.
You go to Lansing, how can high-paid professionals do that? Okay, so then that was like, they didn't like that. So then what happened in November, Mr. Davis sent a letter out stating that the auditors would be giving their report. I said, Mr. Davis, have you seen this audit? He hasn't seen anything. I said, you're letting the auditors come and give their report on the poor condition of the school and then people are gonna think that the board, and I'm trying to find that report, which I'll try to find the letter, but anyways, the auditors, the emergency manager then wanted to present the auditor's report, this is what looks good and bad. And then if the board agreed, if they're sitting there, then when it goes to the public about the deficit, then why the board? So what, and they did not tell the president of the board that they were coming, so Mr. Davis called it off. He's told the emergency manager, you're not coming here with the external auditors and reviewing a report that we have not seen. The emergency manager sent him a letter later on and said, I'll have your neck. He said, what do you mean? Calling this off, and somehow my name was in there that the consultant said the audit, as a CPA and auditor, we have to review it with the decision makers. And I told Mr. Davis and the board, I said, all they're doing is just giving you guys documents and you're not reviewing it, just like the one thing. And I said, when is enough enough? So they did make mention that audit, that consultant of yours, she had no right, and this was Early Davis, Mr. Early saying I didn't have any right to it. But anyway, so as you can see, and this is public record, again, these are things that if you don't know and the book, and when looking at it, you look at, they give it to you real quick, you got it done, and we need it in 5 days. So you're looking at it, if you're not familiar with financial statements, you automatically, okay, well, he's the EM, so reporting to the governor, and the staff is all CPAs and all this kind of stuff, so it's probably right. And they couldn't put it on the news because they would have had so much, and Early was in trouble it was. Yes?
I mean, even if this was on the news, the common person wouldn't understand this. I mean, I have some accounting background, and it's hard for me to grasp, what really happened based on the numbers. But that's not my real question. My real question is, we're here to review financial documents and learn how to read them and what they mean, but also, maybe this is another class, but what happens after that? Clearly these people were wrong, right?
What happened?
Who holds them
They wanted to
accountable?
indict them, that's what happened.
But who holds them accountable? If there isn't a governmental body.
Exactly. Well, that's what I was just saying. You cannot have the state.
What do you mean by
Just
that?
like during the French Revolution. People held them
There's no oversight. Mr. Davis has. What was
And
it?
one of the things we've got to remember is that the Emergency Loan Board is appointed by the governor. And everything that the Board of Education submits to the Emergency Loan Board, objecting to what the emergency manager does, by law, they had the right to overturn what we asked. If we said no, they could say the board said yes, even though we said no. How can that be?
My question is, after the emergency manager he's done his damage, he's collected his fee, and he's gone.
Mhm.
Everything is now given back to the school board, correct?
Nope.
The school board is reinstated. Okay, so what happens after that?
After he's gone, then you had an election, and they blame the school board, the old school board, like Mr. Davis, that they was responsible for that when it was the emergency manager. So they put in a new school board and they put in a review team. The new school board can vote anything they want to, but it must be reviewed by these three guys who's appointed by the state. So the state still is in charge.
So they left a review team.
It's all about the money. It's $1 billion, $2 billion coming through here every year. Somebody's got to control it. The state wants to control it, and they have done that since they passed the bond.
Without explaining to us who do we, like, if, okay, I'm angry, I'm an upset citizen. What is my next step? Where do I go? Like, because we got a lot of information just made us upset. But like, what do we do after that? So that's what I'm getting at by who's accountable, who should I go to, what's the next step? Like, if you're not giving us that, then it's like,
Well,
what's the point?
it means you got to get involved. You got to get in there and get you a new governor and new state
So
legislatures.
that takes a process, right?
Yeah.
And it takes people coming together and knowing what are their action items. Like, after these types of meetings, what is our next step? What is our
Right.
action
And
items?
that- and-
For instance, the $15 million that we spoke of, where the EEA was supposed to pay back the city of Detroit, right?
Hey.
And they didn't pay it, right?
Right.
So at this point, who's accountable for that money?
So-
Like, who should? Like, we're all upset about that. Just that portion of money.
So,
Who
so,
should
so you're an accounting student, then you
No,
know
I'm not an accounting student. I'm a
Concerned
humanitarian.
citizen.
you're a concerned citizen. What's going to ultimately, because see, politics dictate what's going on, and money, people are greedy. That's really the motivation. What's ultimately going to happen is there's a thing in accounting what we call writing off a bad debt, and that's it. You never see it anymore.
What the state did was they called it forgiven.
Yes.
They gave us the
See?
money.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I understand what you were saying because I was so angry, and I wanted to paste it all over Facebook and let them be embarrassed. This is what the governor approved, and this is an Excel spreadsheet. Of course, I would have to have a group of people helping me because I would have been.
Because people are sitting at home watching TV, we don't know what we're looking
It-
at,
you
right?
Right,
So
yes.
if we
don't-
knew what
right.
we're looking at, and then if that was pasted on Facebook, we would be up screaming. But we don't know what we're looking at. It takes too much energy to understand.
Well, right,
But-
and that's
so we
another
would,
thing.
Like, dummy it down for us.
Yeah, another. Yeah.
Just real quick, so the information that your new findings, and then you gave it to the president, was it announced at the school board? Like if I attended a school board meeting, was that information transferred to the public?
Yes.
The news.
So, you see what I'm saying? So like the information that you found that you gave to the president,
Mhm.
and then when we had our next school board meeting, if I would have attended that meeting as a resident, I would have found out about this.
Yes.
discrepancy.
You still wouldn't have been able to do nothing, but yes, you would have known about it.
But
Yes,
I could
'cause-
have mobilized around the information that I found.
But then you'd have been going up to emergency manager. This is the man.
Right, but
that-
I understand the whole process.
Right,
And
yes.
The governor is a high level accountant.
Right,
so
yes,
He's
yes.
just to be blamed.
Yeah,
Right,
you're
yes.
right. I mean, it's quite. This is that Excel spreadsheet is reckless. I mean, it's ridiculous. And then where we showed the emergency manager, and he wouldn't even return their calls. And he
To your
submitted-
second question, we're doing this not just to get you motivated, but the next time you can look at documents, and this is how you analyze. You just don't accept these numbers going across. You look at each and every one of them going across. That's what we're trying to get you. Analyze. Why did it go up? Why is this negative number here and an expense, which is an impossibility and so forth?
And,
Or when you're looking at financial statements, you do a comparison. That's what you take away from it, regardless, and not just here, that is anything where you see numbers that do analysis, a comparison. And normally, if it's a CPA report, if there's a huge swing in the back, CPA report's 145 pages, but in back of it is a note telling you why it happened. But you have to be patient, you have to be diligent, and you go through it. It explains why it went up. And so that's what we're trying to impart you today. In other words, follow the money.
Well, and another thing, because I was really mad, I wanted to get all the Cash Tech kids to be on the board, to come to board meeting and read these. Because what I think, if we start with, and those students, they know how to do that. And I wanted to just write, and they come to a meeting, they're the victim. Who are your stakeholders? Your kids. You're making money off of my children. Just like McDonald's makes money off of selling hamburgers. Well, you're making money off of my kids because without my children, then you're not going to collect the tax, the money from the state. So my children are your stakeholders, and you're making a profit, and you're putting it in your pocket and going down the street. So basically, the child is the victim. And I really, and some of this is a simple Excel spreadsheet. And like you said, accounting can get complicated. I stay up at night, so I've been doing it for 35 years, and I'm about ready to throw in the whatever, the scarf or whatever. And but I hang in there, and now I'm trying to give back to the community, so the Lord give me strength. But anyways, and we could get in trouble. They want to take us on to jail, so we have to be. So basically, starting from high school, they come to some of these meetings, looking at some of the stuff. They are sharp enough. The older you get, it's difficult, but they're sharp enough to know that stuff. We got to get our community, our kids, and people involved, because a high school kid, I gave this to a high school kid, and he did just like you, and you get an award after this. You get to read more financial statements. Yeah, I mean, we gotta have help. Like you said, it's so intense knowing this stuff. Going to learning how to read a budget, Excel spreadsheets. If you know that, you can get it. Looking at a line item that might say administrative. What do you mean administrative? Well, I want to know what made up that. So we went into the website and found contracts and stuff, and we'll show you that. Then, so basically teaching the community to get out and really go after this. Okay, what time are we? I'm trying to. This accounting could go through so much. So that's what we saw with the Detroit Public Schools and the ultimate demise of the old school board, which worked so hard. I mean, they tried, Mr. Davis and all, they tried, and it was, and Earl and I, we would go to the meetings and give them a lot of information and so forth. But we hadn't been invited to the new school. I don't know who's doing that. They're probably paying a high price consultant. We thought we would get a contract, but we never did. But anyways, so do we have any? So that's kind of what can happen if you're not involved with the budgeting projects. And then what I say is little things like Excel spreadsheet budgeting, little things that you start at home and going out to these meetings. Now what we're going to do, and then we've got, I'm just going to show you the balance, what a balance sheet is. You probably already know what that is. And you mentioned the audit, what happens when they come in and do the audit. The balance sheet, again, consists of the current assets and the liabilities. I'm just going to run through this real quick. Liabilities is what they owe, and of course, if your liabilities are high, then that means your net worth is that you have a severe problem. The income statement, again, that was where we showed the revenue and expenses, and that's part of the budget. So really, the budget, when the auditor gets ready to do the report, then they take the budget, which is the actuals, and they put it into a financial statement, and then they go through the expenses. But then what they do, and I'm going to switch over to the audit documents. When we go out to do an audit, then we have to look at board minutes and budget approval. If we see that there was something done that did not have budget approval, then that's a write-up. So let me go into the stages involved in the audit documentation. Get this guy up here.
Well, she's doing that again. What she's talking about, approval for the government. If you're going through the balance sheet and you see suddenly an asset that increased, a building prior year was $2 million, now it's $4 million. Obviously, they didn't bought a building. You can't do that without getting board approval in minutes. And so, if you don't see it in there, then something doesn't happen. That's for an auditor. I immediately want to investigate that and see what's going on. And that's the kind of things that you can look at, analyze it year to date, prior year versus this year. You need to analyze. You can do that with cash receivables, everything going down, it'll trigger something in you, and just to ask the right questions.
So when we're talking about public documents, what is a document? It's a printed piece of paper with legal, and that's where I kept what was given, that document that was in that paper. That's a document that was relied on for approving the budget. So you have to, if you want to prove something, you've got to have the document. You got to have documentation. The auditor comes in, they want documentation, they want to see procedures, and they, I don't know if they looked at, they were probably like, well, who put this Excel spreadsheet together? Are they trained to know how to do Excel spreadsheets? But the problem is the emergency manager approved it. He looked at it and approved it and sent it on, because again, he approved it because it was a balanced budget. So he wanted, to think that the school board didn't have common sense to look at that. That's what I didn't understand. They're giving the school board, who's educated, been on the board, thinking you're just going to accept any kind of stuff. So you need to understand the purpose of audit documentation. When the auditor comes in, it has to be documentation. If you find out that somebody got a contract and it wasn't properly signed, you can call the whistleblower hotline, and they will pull that contract and see there's only one signature, and somebody could get in trouble because the documentation. So we look at, your policy said 2 people need to sign this and only one signed for 1.5. Why was that? And we disallow it, and they're gonna go after seeing, is there some related party, or is it your buddy, or so that could be fraud and jail time, especially if it's federal money. So the documentation is, if you call, and then ownership of the audit files. That means who owns these files? The governor and the emergency manager. Since the school board had no say-so, then we put the ownership on the emergency manager, because he's the one saying do this, do that, and then it's going to the state, so he has ownership, so he'd be the first one they would look at. And, of course, he would try to blame it on the staff, but confidentiality of audit files. A lot of times when we would go in and look for stuff as an outside person, they wouldn't let us see it. The school board wanted to see certain things. Oh, no, you got to go through this and that. Now, if I come in and do an audit and you tell me I can't look at it, I immediately close the audit down and tell you what, we're gonna give you a qualified or adverse opinion, or we're gonna withdraw and make it public why we're withdrawing, because you are withholding documentation. So that's why you have to have. Now, if the auditor goes on and doesn't, then they could be in bed with him, just like Arthur Anderson. So it's real sticky. You just can't play ball with your client. Audit documentation is a principal record of auditing procedure. So after the budget's all played with, they had to hurry and do the budget and tell the city, the public, we don't have money, because they didn't have money. They knew that in the beginning. How did you know that you went and took 2 mortgage loans out, and you know that you only have one job, and you mean to tell me by 3 months from now you thought you were still going to pay your mortgage? Where were you going to get the money? They knew that. So basically, it was intent to, I look at it as intent to defraud, but, who am I? And they did it because they wanted to keep things quiet, because they knew they weren't going to have money. Sarbanes-Oxley, that's when that big blow up of years ago, all the money was taken, and they decided that Senator Sarbanes, Congressman Oxley put this in. They said now jail time will go to the top, not the bottom. And basically, we CPAs had to do special training on that, and they would actually assign an internal audit staff to be separate. Now, the school board had a separate internal audit staff, which was the auditor general. But he was supposed to look at stuff, and then all of a sudden they decided they didn't need an internal auditor. Now you were getting, whenever your public money bonds on with J.P. Morgan on SEC, you were supposed to have that. So they decided, and he, in talking with him, he said there was so much stuff they wouldn't let him see. So the board knew, it was told to the board couldn't do nothing, told to the governor, they got him on out of there. So basically, in most companies, you have to have an internal audit staff to kind of tell you what needs to be done. Okay, so types of documentation, vouchering, tracing documents. It's just all, if you suspect that there's something going on, then we would go in, or somebody would go in and they would trace the documents. If there's no trail or something's missing, we know that you fudged the figures. So again, you got your internal document prepared and used by the inside. You got documentation that has been in the hands of outside parties. So it gets, again, like she was saying, it gets, this one meeting is probably very, there's a lot to know, but I think the basic thing is just knowing budgets and what, if it doesn't add this way, that doesn't make sense. Okay, document tracing. Audit documentation serves mainly to provide the principal support. So the auditor comes in and somebody said that, just like I guess when somebody stole money from the school system and they went in there, you see, when you're ordering supplies, there should be a purchase order that you ordered in. Then with those supplies, and then approval by 2 people. When the supplies are delivered, there should be a packing slip that you count the supplies, then you go match it up with what was approved, but this has got to be somebody separate from the same person. That wasn't done. And that's why a lot of the overthrow of the system, where you order something, nobody needs it. It comes, the books come, well, we don't know, 20 books you said, well, we paid for 50.
Right.
So, poor internal controls. Why? They took out the internal audit staff that could look at this and say, hey, your controls are bad. And a lot of times, that's why when people see an auditor come, oh, we don't want the auditor coming. But the internal staff is there to help you. When I worked with Sarbanes, when I was in Nevada, I worked as the internal auditor for SEC. We were hired by the board to tell them what was wrong before the auditor came. And we found a lot of things. We took it. And so they were able to resolve it internally, clean it up, because when the outside auditors come, or SEC, they would be in. So they wanted us to tell them. In this case, the school board didn't want you to tell. The governor did not want them to tell them what was wrong. So that's kind of the audit documents. I'm going to run through this. And again, if you fail to have this, they will write you up and so forth. So all this is just documentation. So you got to be, they should be prepared and organized and have your audit file. So, and then these are all the things you got to have. Financial statement. There's a lot of detail at the end from the budget. So we come in, we see the budget, then we have to prepare a financial statement, working balance sheet, and then the feds may want to come in, they want to see all this stuff. So basic, do we have any questions? One of the things we were going to show you the website of and some of the findings at the Detroit Public School. I put them in your package. They found a lot of the auditors had things that, and let me see if I have a picture of that, where they found things and they were ignored. Normally if an auditor finds certain findings, then they'll say you need to correct these. No correction was done because you didn't have the governor emergency, whatever, we did it. So if the board, when you went to a board meeting, and say the president of the board said, well, how come you didn't correct these things? They wouldn't get back with you and tell you why certain things were not corrected. So let me see if I can find an audit report before. I know we're pressing for time. Does anybody have any questions or anything?
I just have one. So if there were no internal auditors, how was all the principals caught?
How or what?
All the principals that went to jail and went to court, to federal court? Was that a whistleblower or?
That was probably what, a whistleblower. How was they?
Well, what really happened is the people that was really bribing them turned them in.
Oh,
That's
okay.
how it happened.
Okay.
They got away clean, but because in total, all 13, it wasn't but $2 million. I mean,
Right,
it
wasn't
sounds
enough
like a
money.
lot, but it, chopped up. It wasn't enough. In the meantime, they had a deal where the emergency manager bought, was it 6 or 4 floors in the Fisher building for $24 million, and then they sold the whole Fisher building for $12 million.
Yes.
So how, you talking about stealing and robbing, that's, I'm sorry, I get on my soapbox sometime. I was hanging with Mr. Davis so much, we became revolutionary accountants, I guess.
Yeah, you really felt good about having a title revolutionary. Now this is the Detroit Public School website. If you go in there, you can see where, now over here it says budget, salary, and then the reported number of kids. So say we hit this, and it would go into the budget. So if you hit that, you're going to see what now they have their 2018 budget, and it's been adopted. So that meant they did the same thing. If Mr. Davis was still in the seat, they would have gave him something fudged and tell him to get it in 3 days, or else, that's it for you. And we even went up to Lansing to protest. Didn't mean a thing. They looked at us like we were idiots or something. So now this is the new budget that's for 2018, and it's got the property taxes. Is the includes the following. Oh, so I guess the new budget, they've got property taxes in there, and the rent. So these are things you can look or go to the meetings, and I don't know where. And here's the new budget. So they've got property taxes, final budget, and they're putting the property taxes back in there.
Is that Detroit?
Yes, the new adopted one for the Detroit Public, this is Detroit Public Schools, so they're calling the new system Detroit Community.
Right, yeah.
See, that's another tricky thing.
So that's the old.
That's the
But
old.
it's got 2018 on
Because
it.
see, they carrying 2 different budgets, the old and the new. And this is
Yeah.
But you said the property taxes go into 2018 though, right?
But
in the
they-
old.
In the old
see,
one,
there's
right.
still,
Old.
see, the thing is, this is called Detroit Public Schools.
Yes.
That's how
The
you know.
new one
That's
is
how you
called
know.
Detroit Public Community.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the district.
So they changed the name to kind of confuse you. So they're still doing an old budget for Detroit Public Schools. I guess this is this is a 3-pager here. So you can go into, I'm trying to get back up. Okay.
And this consists of archives. You can go back as 5 or 6 years and get budgets and audit reports straight off of here. So you can get analysis of children. So.
So are there 2 different school districts? Is that what you guys are referring to as old and new?
I can't
You
hear.
did
She
what?
asked, are there 2 different school districts?
I'm sorry.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
there's
Oh,
two
they
just-
do.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Yes.
See,
Two.
the old district is still active too.
Mhm.
We just don't do anything.
Yes.
Right.
Mm.
Got that money in there.
It's to pay the debt.
Yeah.
Okay, so
To be
she's
clear,
got
the schools that were considered EEA, are they the Detroit Community Schools?
the
They're
EA.
now they're part
So
of the
they're
community
now
district.
the Detroit Community Schools?
Yes.
And the schools that did not join the EEA are still part of Detroit Public Schools?
No. No
How do they
schools are
determine
part
who
of,
gets public funds and who don't?
no schools are part of Detroit Public Schools.
Right.
That's
There are
just-
no
It's
schools.
just
That's the
collecting.
old
It's just a
data.
shell to
But
pay
that's
that
like
debt
the
off.
legal name, the name change. They had to change the name in order to write off the old balance
Mhm.
and create a new place, a
We
new.
have a whole budget for it and everything?
So that's 68 million, you talking about where that goes to the blank slate.
Right.
Because your property
Remember I was
taxes-
telling you about the property tax versus the debt service? This is the whole thing here.
Because your property taxes is going to pay off that debt that they
So they're showing
misused.
that.
$2.1 billion of debt that they misused. They're taking our property taxes to pay it off.
On the article that you just showed us, the proposed budget, it had expenditures, or it had like the transportation and all of
Right,
It
yeah,
is?
it's still going on.
Yeah, so why, if this is DPS and it's just supposed to be the debt, then why does it have all of the other expenditures?
But see, if you go to the third column, that's where the proposal is, isn't this right here?
The
I can't
adopted.
see. The adopted, you notice that all this is missing over there. The adopted, this is the one you concentrate on, the third column.
This was the action.
You don't see the transportation and things going there,
Right.
it's adopted. Mhm.
Now, another
It's the
thing, okay, over here it's got the, elimination. I just saw
So
it.
can we
Okay,
see
approved
the-
deficit
yes.
elimination plan. So this goes in some of the questions you might want, it's a lot to read, but, they go
What she's
in,
showing is whenever you have a deficit, you must submit a deficit reduction plan. How you gonna get rid of this? You got a $200 million deficit, how you gonna get rid of it? You got to come up with some kind of plan, even if it don't work. It has to be submitted to the state and so forth. And this actually shows it. John, it's radical. A lot of people are supposed to get laid off and so forth.
see, you don't know
Some
whether to
schools-
trust it. If you, looking at the Excel spreadsheet that was fudged, how do you know this other stuff isn't?
Mhm.
So when you look at one thing they're doing, then you're wondering, oh, you're playing around with all the other stuff. So they come up with a deficit financial plan. Let's look at this one, financial deficit elimination plan. And they go, there's 10 pages going through what their plans are. Let me see if they got, this is where they amended these and what they plan on doing. So, like I said, this is all on, and it's very detailed. I wanted to show you the auditor's reports. Let's see. Now, here's their procurement policy. That's where we busted them on. You gotta have a policy for everything. Then we found contracts, so we looked up. You can go up in here and scroll under contracts, like you want to do, let's say professional contracts. Let me see what comes up. And you might be able to see who they gave contracts to. Office of Procurement, delegating. Okay, it's just telling the. Then some of these did go into some contracts. But if we did professional staff probation and tenure, I don't know. You just really have to go, and that doesn't help. But there was an area where they could go into the contracts. You could kind of see who got what. Now, the financial, I want to show you some audits real quick. You got the reports, then the auditor comes in and they do, let's see if I can find some of the old audits. I had to go into the transparency to get some of the old audits that and the auditor in some of these cases they have written up. Now this here's an audit here, but it's their audits could be like 145 pages, and it is supposed to go into. This is 2015. The last one is 2016. But then as you go down, it's supposed to go into disallowed costs and things that they should have done and didn't do. This one doesn't. This one doesn't show it. But they have two types of audits: a financial and the compliance shows what. Now this, okay. Now this shows all the federal funds. The auditor has to put what federal funds were received, and the internal controls. It did say something about see right here was a significant deficiency. So they're saying the auditors are Raymond and it's addressed to the emergency manager. Most of the time your audit is addressed to your board of directors. It says we have audited and planning the audit to determine the internal controls. A deficiency exists when the design, and then it says a material weakness is a deficiency, And then it says that, such that there's a reasonable probability that material misstatement of the entity's financial statements will be, and it says, we consider the deficiency described in the company's schedule of findings for 20. So it shows the material weaknesses in the schedule. Let me see here. So that's another way we were showing the school board. Let me see if I can find that again. They did after they went in, they did show some of the weaknesses in the system. And they're saying that then the Detroit Public School has to respond to these
I was
findings.
gonna ask you that.
Mhm.
I was just gonna ask you, do they have to respond
Uh-huh.
to the comments that the auditor?
So it says, yeah, it says
Or
the
plan of
district.
action?
Right, they, right. The district's responses to the findings identified our audits described da da da. So let's see what they said. So these are the things that you had to scroll down to find out what they came up with. But they had problems with their title, major programs. Let's see if they okay. Here's what's the findings. They had material audit adjustments, it says weaknesses, internal control, financial reporting. It says management, the criteria. Management is responsible. Condition. During our audit, we identified adjustments that were approved or post-approved by management that were material, and so forth. Cause existing year-end closing procedures did not detect certain adjustments. In other words, they couldn't detect some of these necessary to properly record, so the auditors couldn't properly record a lot of things. As a result, the following were initially misstated. They had interest on bonds misstated by $612,000, interest payable to bonds $701,000, a chargeable liable related to property taxes overstated by $1.2 million. Then it's got prepaid expenses. Then it's got deferred inflow, $3.7 million. Now let's see what management said. So then management supposed the interest payable to state aid note was overstated by $2.6 million. That's what we just thought. Did I get some water over here? And then it's got receivables and rent revenue understated. That means, yeah, well, you know what that means. Can you tell us what that means? You know what that means. When you understate something, that means it was more. But you understated it.
Uh-huh.
So the auditor came in, depreciation was overstated,
Uh-huh.
which, they I don't know why they did that. Okay, hold on, let me keep going here.
So I should be able to look this up for the state of city of Detroit and everything, right?
And you can go into the city, and
county.
I got bottle
And
gloss.
government.
In my thing right there. Okay, recommendation. The auditors are saying we recommend that the district take steps to ensure that all year-round adjustments, they weren't making the adjustments, probably because the emergency manager didn't want them to. Okay, let's see what I don't see what, the budget. They're saying that the budget is repeatedly not balancing, material non-compliance in internal control over budgets. The state of Michigan requires the governor to adopt the budgets for the general fund and The district is prohibited from adopting a budget. Well, they did give you credit, Mr., that you were prohibited. So they're saying that the auditors saying that you're prohibited. Condition, the district budgeted a fund deficit in general, which violates the Uniform Budgeting Accounting Act. The causes, and it goes on, it says view of the responsible officials, which would be your emergency manager and so forth. They had thanks. So the district budget fund is deficit. So they're saying, the officials are saying, this is what we look at. We're just saying that the budget had a deficit. They'll take appropriate steps. So they have to respond. But then next year it's the same thing. So like I said, it's a repeated response. Then you go on to budget, again, expenditures exceed appropriations by significant. So the auditors, they have to tell the truth, because if they don't, I mean, they could be paid underneath the table, but why bother to risk your career? It's not worth it. I mean, so they come out, but see, nobody sees this to correct it, because this report was done, and the board was told that the auditors were going to come and talk about the report. What are they? Excuse me, I told Mr. Davis, what are they talking about? They haven't given you a report. No one's going to come to me and report on my financial condition unless, even though I'm not in control of it, unless I see it first. And you're going to tell the public. So we banded them, and Mr. Davis got a really nasty letter from the emergency manager saying, "You do that again, Davis, and I've got your." And he brought the letter to the meeting, and he says, "And that consultant, who is she?" Well, fortunately, I'm just a revolutionary CPA that doesn't make any money, and they chase me out of town. I got another town I go to. I'll just keep, I mean, I'm not anybody. I think I am, I shouldn't say I'm not big wheel in the newspaper, so I don't really care. I'm getting older, so whatever. So anyways, and then here's another thing. The auditors found property taxes. They're saying it's a repeated finding, significant deficiency in the internal control for the reporting. It says that this is criteria. The district is responsible for reconciliation of general ledger. And then it has condition: the levy amount used to calculate the property tax does not reconcile with the taxable values. Nothing was done, and let's see what. And the auditors recommended. They said, we recommend that the district coordinate with the state of Michigan, Wayne County City for applicable local tax information. And this is a view of responsible officials, which would be early. And he's saying, we concur with what you're going to concur, right? And you're going to tell me you're going to do it next year. Next year you don't. The district has and will continue to schedule ongoing. They're saying that they schedule well, if you schedule the meetings, why aren't you coming up with good figures? However, in fiscal year 2014, there were many changes in the city that prevented us from having meetings. But it's always somebody else's fault. I mean, you always hear, I did this, and I mean, these are these are people making lots of money and got plenty of money to do whatever, and we're paying them and they can't come up with something. Here's some other findings. The material weaknesses in the internal control of the financial reporting. They're saying that management is responsible for complete and accurate payroll data. They weren't reporting that good. So the end of the year, the auditor does come and look at what is necessary and the view of the responsible officials. Now, here's a thing that normally is supposed to happen. The following year, when the auditor comes, they can't say the same thing. In other words, if we see, well, you said you did, that's what did you do this year? If they didn't clean up, then we're gonna qualify the opinion. We'll say management did not concur with our recommendations. So they didn't do it. The other auditors, they're supposed to look at, we look at prior year deficiencies. If those deficiencies aren't cleaned up, then there's a problem. Normally, if you do what we call A133, Single Audit Act, if a deficiency isn't cleaned up and your funders say, your funders, Department of Labor, they're going to say, we're not going to fund you anymore because you're not cleaning up the deficiencies. You're just carrying them on, which means that they're still existing. Something still exists. We can't be responsible to keep funding you, which really, if the public had looked at this, they would have, they try to get rid of the emergency manager. So it shows that the emergency manager and those people under the authority of the governor managing the schools, they were not trying to clean up deficiencies. This is in the auditor's report. Okay,
so how long is the review board in place?
The new review board?
Yeah.
How long is that? The new? I don't know.
3 to 5 years, isn't it?
Yeah. Wow.
Oh my God.
For this new board that's now.
Yes.
Wow.
You talk about to review the people who really
Right.
make the decision,
Right.
not to elect the school,
Right.
Right, to review the board stays in. And are they the same one that's for the city of Detroit? They got totally different. Because the city of Detroit really is still under that, even though we, Doug and them are going away, but the review team still comes in.
And see, they spent lots of money for these outside consultants to come in, and they were all from the suburbs. We little people here. They wanted to get more Wayne State people who lived in Detroit that actually got masters in accounting degree. We passed the same exam.
Right.
But no, they brought them from other places to, and they paid them big money to educate the EM and their staff, and the school board never never got the privilege to sit in on these meetings while the decisions were made. Now this is on the capital assets, which are your buildings and stuff. It says material weaknesses and controls over that. The capital asset records were not, the management is responsible for maintaining these records related to acquisition, dispositions, depreciation, and so forth. That wasn't properly done.
If there's all these inconsistencies in the way that they've conducted their audits, I mean, at some point, doesn't the Department of Education have some wherewithal or some
Right.
sort of mechanism to rein in and?
Right, and that's what the school board, the old school board did contact DC. So they could do an investigation, because you're right, the money is a flow through, so if it's not following through, and that's a good point you're making. I was going to show you the schedule.
More to the point, like, where the hell is John Conyers? Like, what is he doing? What's Gary Peters doing? Like, what
That they should have, well, Mr., you want to say something, Mr. Davis?
The governor changed the reporting, took the State Board of Education out of the loop.
Oh, that's right, yeah,
Yeah.
they sure did.
Okay.
Took them out of the loop.
Yeah, they sure
That's where the
did.
EMF came in and filled that gap, basically.
So when the Department of Education could not say it, like I said, he took them out of the loop to,
So the state couldn't report.
Right.
There was no mechanism, there was this firewall, basically.
Oh, wow.
and then, but then you see Donald Trump pointing this new lady who's saying Detroit public schools terrible, all charter schools. Yeah, it's all I don't want to say a conspiracy, but he took them out. Then then they put new people in that's saying Detroit can't run their own school when they had the largest in the United States, and most of your well-to-do people came. I moved to Detroit because I like Detroit because I'm a Hoosier from your vice president's state. I'm gonna call it your vice president, but anyways. Because I thought, wow, those are some smart people up there, and I was just in high school, and I was a little girl looking on the news and looking at Detroit, and I, of course, you got the movie coming out, and I would come to Detroit, and the people lived good, and they were so smart. And when I told them I wanted to be a CPA, oh yeah, when I was in Indiana, I told them that. They told me, and this was my high school teacher, and black people don't know how to count. You're never going to be a CPA. I went to all white school, 95% white, and was from a little city. So I was told I would never be a CPA, and to get it out of my head. And when I talked to, of course, all the black people thought we could never be nothing, so I didn't get in. But when I came to Detroit, they were so encouraging, the black, yeah, come on up here. So when I got my MBA, I didn't manage to get that, even though I was told I wasn't. I came to Detroit, and I was mentored by black CPAs and attorneys, and my clients were black, and I just owe it to Detroit. And my children, when I moved to Las Vegas, they were going to move there and be dealers. I said, oh no, and they stayed here, and one is now vice president with J.P. Morgan. There's just so much. Detroit has a lot for our children, for the next generation, because we are role models, and this should not be happening to a school system. When I came here, the blacks knew how to speak 4 or 5 languages. They were Germans. And it was just amazing to me, and the way they lived, really everything I would see on the movie. But in my little city, you lived on little farms, and you were told you couldn't live any better than that. So anyways, okay, did you have another question? And you have you're like, why is all this happening? The CPAs are finding these areas. When is someone going to step in? You see, and I understand what you're saying. The CPAs are writing reports. These reports are filed in Lansing, Department of Education, This is federal money, and there is another schedule I was trying to find called federal funds, and you'll see all this money coming from the federal government, which should be looked at. But, so this is the end result, your budget, your documentation, your budget.
You're looking for the single.
Yeah, well, yeah, the single audit was just, let me see if I can show them all this federal. We have any questions while I guess we're getting towards the end. I think this is enough. Should we all go to the local bar? I told somebody after this one. And you wonder how I look back at my career, how did I do it? These numbers and stuff, and like I said, then you got people, we have the Board of Accountancy breathing down our back, and basically minority CPAs, the only clients we can get is nonprofit if we get something from the city, if they have RFP, or maybe a black account, we sometimes get jobs in corporate America. They don't want us to know how to do their money. If it's a rich business, they're not going to have Linda Taylor know how to. Are you for real? So basically, our education has value, but doesn't have the money. And all we're doing, and we do a lot of nonprofit audits. I basically am more of a consultant. I've kind of just drained. When I see stuff, I'm like, it makes you so angry. So I try to educate the people. I was going to show you the schedule of. Now the city has financials like this, and let me go back to. I'm trying to show you all these federal funds. The city, the state. You can go into each website, and I put the samples of the websites. You can go in there where it says reporting. It's going to show budgets, and it's going to show. I don't know. This is a 286-page audit report. So I don't know if I'm going to find the part that's. I'll have to go back to the beginning.
So are there many people that attend the school board meetings? Because you can attend the council meetings when they do the budgets, right?
They weren't in the past when before this new came in. I mean, literally, the board would have a meeting in a room a third this size here because about 10 people would show up or something, maybe 12.
Because most folks knew that the board had no influence or power.
And then I had heard that they had little PTAs that they were paying people, giving people money to be in charge of. And so that's why a lot of the people, they were influenced parents to listen to them, I guess, the ones that were being paid to start these little PTA meetings. I'm not sure how, there's some, I don't know how that works. There's another lady that basically, I was trying to find all the federal funds, but this report's going to take forever for me to find it. But, yes.
Earlier you were talking about how the school board had to put together a plan for how they're going to pay off the debt. And then I just wonder how when city council approves using what was the taxes that were going to pay off that debt for like a $34 million tax subsidy for the Pistons, how like that impacts like the school's plan to pay off debts.
And the guy last week was showing you the debt was whatever we're getting at $68 million now. They will continue to get that because all that's going to be done is the additional tax that comes from the stadium going up will be used to pay the $34 million. But so they'll still continue to get our $68 million. Yeah, still go over there. It's just additional that they would have gotten will not be going over there. So.
Since you mentioned that money, you probably know that there's a referendum, and for those of you that want petitions, Robert Davis will have petitions by tomorrow.
Okay. How do we get? He's gonna try and put it on the ballot then?
Yes, that's what, matter of fact, that was who was calling me to let folks know at this meeting that he'll have petitions tomorrow.
Petitions for?
How do we get
for that referendum. And
they're saying that the 34 million that the council gave to the Pistons should have came before the people. You
Oh, okay.
should have had.
Okay,
had
because I think
so
Brenda
this-
Jones voted against it because she wanted that money to go
Right.
to the school.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is Robert Davis's telephone number, if anybody wants to put it down. You can call him at 313-523-7118. And he'll have petitions for that referendum.
Do you know how many signatures they require?
I had it down somewhere, but I don't remember what it was. But it's a reasonable amount that,
Like 10%?
that can be done. Yeah.
Got 90 days.
No, they have 30 days.
Yeah.
They only gave them 30 days to do it.
Yeah,
I
I
thought
think I
state
heard
law said
that.
90.
Well,
Oh,
you
because
see,
the municipal petition is less, or
see, they changed the law,
Janice, or the state?
the state, to force them to do it in a short period of time. In other words, they had 90 days to do all the things that need to be done, but only a 30-day window
To get the signature.
for the signatures. In other words, if you start getting them on this date, you only have to that date to finish.
Okay, so. Anyway, so the last thing is, the auditors, they do issue one last letter to cover, and the letter states, and I'll get this letter here in a minute. It's called, a representation letter, and what they're doing is, telling the school board that you represent this and you're representing this and that, and then they're telling them, that they have to agree that all the funds and all of that was properly documented. This is, in case this goes to court, the CPA firm is not liable for something that was misrepresented. So they had like 5 pages of things that is provided in connection with the audit. And it talks about certain things so Darnell Early, he would be the one signing off. Let me see if he signed off down here. And so here's your chain of command and all these people representing. Yes, we showed you this, we showed you that, and and we agree with this and that. So they sign off. So this is a document. So basically, if something goes wrong, then they can't say, well, we didn't say that. You know, I mean, you said you represent it. Come on now. So that's why CPA, when we go and do an audit, we have to get documentation because the tables start getting turned. And if somebody wants to put the point the fingers, so always look at documentation. I tell clients, keep your documentations, and when I go do something, I try to make sure I have proper documentation. Even if you have a job as an accountant and you're chief financial officer, document it. If things look bad, you need to leave. I've had to leave. There's a job that it was going nowhere, and I told them I resigned. And I didn't have probably a piece of bread and a cup of coffee, but I said I didn't want to be going to sleep at night watching my back. Now here's another thing that CPAs, independent auditors, communication with those charged with governance. That means the CPA again is saying you are the governing board. You are responsible. So now the Board of Accountancy is making us get all kinds of sign-offs because there's so much fraud. And then they're looking at our papers to see, we have to do peer review and stuff to see, did you get him to sign off? And so basically with all this sign-off, and they're saying we have audited your financials, our responsibility in relation to this audit is limited by our professional standards and so forth. So basically, then let's see who signed off here. Management, it says management's estimate, everything management has done, they have to, and then they have, if there's disagreements with management, uncorrected misstatements, sometimes we'll go in and management's come up with their own general accepted accounting principle. I mean, this is what then they tell me, you do, and I'm like, no, I don't do that. I'm here as an independent. They want me to help them. So you get a lot of, and you might have disagreements with management. Most of them will go, will try to do what you ask them to do. I don't really work with a lot of big clients. But I guess, okay, they sent this letter, Raymond and them, they sent the letter to, so basically there's a lot of things that so at the end they have to sign off. And you see the school board didn't sign off of any of this. Normally it would be the school board in an audit. At the end of the picture, it would be the president of the school board and the elected school board officials. But this is signed off by the emergency, which means they were responsible for the budget, for the deficit. School board's name is on none of this stuff. And again, this is another document that if the general public knew, and so you got Darnell, you got the deputy, Dolores Brown, executive director of finance, Michael Bridges, Linda, somebody over, director of state and federal program. So that generally is not who we have signed off
You
with.
can't do that. That's emergency manager. You're auditing him. You're supposed to get a report to the board because you can know where do they do that. You don't give the president in effect a copy of the audit because I'm auditing him.
Right.
But the emergency manager system churn everything around and so forth.
So he signed all this. That means everything that they looked at, budgets, everything is their responsibility. It has nothing to do with the old school board. I don't know who's going to sign up on the new, what their policies and procedures are. I don't know. The last.
You got second name up there?
Marios, M-A-R-I-O-S.
And you can go on the website. Go on Detroit Public Schools website. And now some of these people may no longer be there. A lot of times when there's a change of emergency managers, they get rid of the staff because the new person come in may say, I want somebody new because I don't want so they know too much, or they may go back.
Yeah,
Usually when you're way at the top, expect to be fired. Save your money. Because don't get in debt. Because then you may not want to be working with a corrupt system.
Absolutely.
I mean, I had a couple of the board people were very nice, and they said, Linda, we would love to see you get a contract with Detroit Public Schools. I said, I don't think so. I don't want a contract with you. I said, this is when all the corruption. I said, because I don't want control. And I said, if they're doing all that, then I know I would just be saying, yeah, I'm just not ready to, So basically, yeah, when you get to the top, you need to, and then when you come, if you're going to take a job under a corrupt system, or that the government is so politically controlled, to just, if you take it, get your money, do whatever, but be careful. It's just too much. A lot of these jobs, and at positions that, when you become a CPA and you got your bachelor's in that, then you want to make it to, the higher up you get. I branched off and went to my own business because the higher up you get, particularly if it's politics, you don't know what you're signing this, and they're like, you sign this, we got to have it by tonight, and you're trying to read it, and I'm going to give you, I've had jobs where they promised me a promotion if I would get some senator and this was in another state, some senator had some federal funds, and I was doing the audit, and they was like, we don't want him to run, see if you can find. I said, what? I said, I will not do that. Of course, I came from a little Christian family, I said, I'm not doing that. And he says, well, obviously they canceled my contract at the end. I didn't even know what he was talking about. And then the news called me. I was getting the email. They said, did you, because he had this particular lobbyist, didn't want this guy to run for senator who did run, and wanted me to find fraud in this. And then the news, he had already told the news to call me about, and this was in another state. This was in Nevada. So basically, this was in Michigan. And I said, what are you calling? You know, I had never really been. I'm like, I don't know nothing you guys are doing. I'm out here. And then, so I knew when they said your contract is not going to be renewed. I mean, for a year, I just did, cut costs, but God, I came back. Yeah, so basic, and then the guy did become senator, and I saw him at a fundraiser, and he shook my hand. He said, I know you didn't do what they told you to do. So then, so he gave me faith. So people are gonna, you may step back, but you may move forward 2 more steps by doing the right thing. But again, if you got a family, of course, I didn't have a family to raise, or my kids were grown, and the mortgage was there, but I was like getting older. I was like, well, I don't care. I can live with senior citizens, whatever. I mean, at this point, you better do who wants to go to jail at this age. So there's just so many little things. But anyways, do we have any questions? And I guess it's 8:18. I don't know. We're supposed to stay till 9 o'clock. I wanted to thank the audience and the Detroit Equity Lab and Miss Levy and all the distinguished guests we have here, Mr. Davis, and I didn't get who you look distinguished too. Everybody does. I wanted,
I'm just a Wayne State grad student.
Oh, you are? What area?
Well, I'm kind of in the library science, but I'm thinking about going into education, learning.
Okay, good.
Information.
And you gentlemen in the back, you had I see you're very inquisitive. That's great.
Well, I'm tired of people asking me in California what the hell's going on in Detroit. So
You're from California?
I'm born and raised in Detroit. My family's been here 100 years, but I'm just like, this is ridiculous. Like, I try to explain it to people, and they just say, no, it's just the people. I say, no, it's not the people. It's the system. I do politics, so I understand.
Right.
It's a power grab.
That everybody, for some reason, they think that Detroit is so bad, and it's strange though. I have friends that are from California. In fact, my husband is, and he's born in Berkeley, so that's like real high end. And San Francisco houses. He's coming here and doing better here than he did in California, because of the property and the people are like, oh yeah, you want to do that? Hey, yeah, the people. And I have had people come in. They're like, they're so friendly in Detroit. They want to do things and so forth. So I think I'm pretty proud of Detroit. I mean, I was born in Indiana and came here, and then I moved to Vegas, and I was in Vegas for 12 years, but I like Detroit better. Down the winter time it's a little cold, but they just have the opportunities and getting involved with the community. That's my passion. When I was in Vegas, I was with the gaming, I was with Bellagio, and we came back and opened up Motor City. I was a pit boss and a CPA. But that industry was more into, the gaming and so forth. Now they're into the medical marijuana recreational. Now I have clients that do. I mean, I've trained in that too in Colorado. But we trained in the controls. I don't do the marijuana, but we put the controls. We show them how to put the controls in order and help them prepare for taxation and things of that nature. So I try to be very diverse in terms of what I like to do. But Detroit, the friends and the bonding, and I think Detroit is coming back. I just would like to see the children. There's so many talented children. Then you got you got schools and so forth here. Las Vegas didn't have that. They only had like UNLV, and most kids that graduated, they were in the recreation entertainment business.
And hotels.
Yeah, well, the girls are a little bit more than that. Yeah, hotel management and cocktail waitress and dealers and things like that, where you can make really good money. But in the end, it's all about, and I know, and I told my kids to stay here, and they came out, pretty good in terms of the educational system. So the educational system is here, but we got to start from the beginning. But we would like to thank everyone that participated. If you have any questions, or if you ever want me to come and do something voluntary, I don't know if I want to volunteer, but I guess that's, if you need help, I'm here. So again, the gentleman right here, thank you for answering that question. You really knew that. Now, what do you do?
I'm data analyst at Wayne State, and then I do organizing around community benefits.
Oh, okay, so you, okay. Sharon, thank you, and thank you for helping, and then you're gonna YouTube this, right? Okay, thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, thanks.